I'm Carson Horn, and it's time for another edition of Talkin Tumors, where I break down the latest happenings in Auburn athletics. Let's get rolling. For Auburn athletics, a lot going on. The news is constantly changing. We have a ton to get into on today's edition of Talkin Tumors. What was week one of the Alex Golesh era like for Auburn football? A lot of news was going on. You had National Signing Day. The roster starting to turn over. Coaching hires were being made. It's a busy time around Auburn athletics. Auburn basketball had two games this week, two big games this week. We'll get into those, break those down, give a recap of that, some takeaways, some thoughts moving forward for Auburn basketball. So suffice to say, it might be December. Christmas time is right around the corner, but that does not mean things are slowing down around Auburn University and Auburn athletics. So we have plenty to talk about on this edition of Talkin Tumors. I am Carson Horn. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. I greatly appreciate it. We're back on YouTube this week. Just a side note there, unlike last week, we're not able to get back on YouTube. So for those of you who watch there, I really do appreciate it and glad to get back to having some video this week. But let's start out with Auburn football in the week that was for Alex Golesh. So a week ago at this time, or around this time, Alex Golesh was hired as the next head coach of Auburn football, and he hit the ground running. It was a busy week for him. Auburn had a big, I guess you could call it, pep rally before his press conference last Monday, and then he had to get to work on retaining staff, on working to sign a class. National Signing Day was this past Wednesday, and that process is still ongoing. The signing class is over. We'll discuss that in just a minute. But as far as the retaining staff and figuring out the current roster, who's going to stay, who's going to leave, that process is still ongoing. That's the hard part about having a podcast and this not being a live show, is that by the time some of you listen to this, there's a good chance there's more news, whether that's on the coaching front or with the roster. So if that's the case, I apologize again. It's the tough part of doing a podcast when news is constantly changing. But I can talk about what we know as of this point, as I am recording this on Sunday, December the 7th. So that's what we will go with today. So let's start out with the biggest news, though, from the week one of the Alex Golesh era, and that was he retained DJ Durkin. This was a big deal. There's a lot of controversy, I guess you could call it, surrounding this whole situation with DJ Durkin. There's some thought out there that maybe this was the reason that John Sumrall did not take the Auburn job, is that John Cohen forced DJ Durkin onto whoever was being hired. Auburn's side of the story is that's not the case. Again, it's just who do you want to believe on that? I don't really know. Again, there's just the two sides of the story there. But DJ Durkin is going to be retained as Auburn's defense coordinator under Alex Golesh, and I think this was a wise decision from Alex Golesh. I do think it was his choice, just my personal opinion. I think if he wanted to hire someone else, he could have. But the best hire that he could make was retaining DJ Durkin. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. The players love him. It will help as you transition this culture over from the Hugh Freeze era to the Alex Golesh era. And for DJ Durkin, the choice was for him to remain as well. I think he could have had some opportunities at some potential G5 head coaching opportunities, while also some other coordinator opportunities. So he had to make the decision that he wanted to stay. I'm sure he wanted that head coaching job. Any competitor would have wanted it. However, his credit, he decided that he would stay on as defense coordinator, and I think this is a really big deal for Auburn and a really good hire for Alex Golesh to try to maintain and keep the roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where you had some really good players, and also to set yourself up for success in the future with a really good defensive coordinator. Because one thing that Alex Golesh so far in his head coaching career has struggled with has been the defensive side of the football. And so I think he needed to make a good hire, whether it was going to be DJ Durkin or someone else. He needed to go out and get a really good defensive coordinator because that is an area he has struggled so far in his head coaching career, albeit only 3 years in. As far as the defensive strategy goes with Alex Golesh, he said that he has known DJ Durkin for a while. They've crossed paths, never coached together, I don't believe. They have crossed paths over the years. And you have to figure out how to mesh that philosophy, because Alex Golesh and his offense tends to go really fast, tends to be really aggressive, so you're at times putting your defense in tough situations. So they'll have to figure out how to mesh and how to play complementary football, if you will, together. So that'll be something that I'm sure will be discussed throughout the offseason and into summer and into eventually fall camp next year. Along with the defensive side of the ball, Vontrell King-Williams, the Auburn defensive line coach, was retained as well. VKW, as he is affectionately known, has been a star, I think, for Auburn. He was brought with Hugh Freeze from Liberty and took over as the defensive line coach in year 2 under Hugh Freeze, and then, of course, this past season. And he's been an excellent recruiter, for one, but also look at Auburn's defensive line and look at how they performed the last several years. He's been tremendous, so this was, I think, a good decision for Alex Golesh to retain him. I don't think you're going to find many defensive line coaches better than VKW, so he is back. As for the rest of the defensive staff, that is still to be determined. A lot of unanswered questions there. I know that Alex Golesh is bringing over some guys from his USF staff, so maybe a few of those guys can move into position roles. There's still a chance that Auburn retains a couple other guys as well that were on the DJ Durkin staff. We do know that Rob Bellantoni, Auburn's edge coach this past season, will not be returning, but still some question marks for the defensive staff as of the time I'm recording this. DeMarcus Van Dyke is one of the guys from USF that is coming over, that he will have a role on the defensive staff where is still to be determined. Now, as for the offensive staff, to give you an update on it, for the most part, Alex Golesh brought over his entire South Florida offensive coaching staff. So that includes Cody Burns, who is going to be the co-offensive coordinator and associate head coach. What position group he coaches, if he coaches a position group, is still to be determined at this moment. My guess is he will coach wide receivers. That's what he's done in the past. That has still not been decided for certain yet. Along with him, Joel Gordon, who was the co-offensive coordinator at USF, along with Cody Burns, is also being brought over. What position he'll coach is to be determined, but I believe it will be quarterbacks, would be my guess. And then Tyler Hudenick, I apologize if I mispronounced that. He is the offensive line coach coming over from South Florida. So tight ends coach is still to be determined as far as I know. Running backs coach and wide receivers coach is still to be determined. The only position group that we have down for certain at this moment is offensive line. But Cody Burns and Joel Gordon will both be a part of the offensive staff coming over from South Florida with Alex Golesh. So that's the staff update for now for everyone who may have not been in the loop this week. You're busy at work and you don't have time to follow this. I was just wanting to give you some information as far as the staff goes and where it stands as I am recording this on Sunday. Again, more hires could have been made by the time you're listening to this. The staff is starting to get filled out. More moves are still to be made and will be made as the month progresses. I think you'll start to see it speed up a little bit because so much of the focus was on signing day for Auburn this past week that some of the staff hires, I think, got pushed to the side a little bit while Auburn was working to assign a high school recruiting class. But now that is over, you can start to move forward a little bit more with getting the staff in place. So as far as my opinions, though, go on the staff to this point, I have no problem with Alex Golesh bringing over his South Florida offensive staff. They've been really good. A lot of those guys have experience at the SEC level. Of course, Cody Burns was with Auburn. He has been at Tennessee. He has been with the New Orleans Saints, so plenty of experience there. Joel Gordon and Tyler Hudenick have also had experience at higher levels with Alex Golesh. I have no problem. Their offense has been really good. I have no issue whatsoever with that. It does seem, for the most part, even in off-the-field roles, Alex Golesh is bringing the majority of his South Florida staff. I get the concern about that. I understand the comparisons. Look, this happens at most every program when a new coach is hired. They want to bring their staff that was with them at other places or was with them at previous stops because they're comfortable with those guys. So usually you get a few some new blood in there, but for the most part, it's usually guys that have been with the previous head coach at their previous stop. So this isn't something that is just a Alex Golesh situation. So would I have liked Alex Golesh to maybe keep a few other guys, especially off the field, like Will Redmond, who's been the GM for Auburn and has done a fantastic job the last several years? Sure, I would have liked that. However, again, it's a new era, it's a new head coach, and you have to let him decide who he wants to bring and who he's comfortable with putting together a staff. And obviously, most of those guys are the ones he had with him at South Florida and some that were with him at Tennessee when he was the offensive coordinator. So for the most part, I don't have anything to really nitpick as far as the staff goes so far, but we'll see how it really finishes out here in the coming days and weeks. With that being said, now let's discuss signing day for Auburn. So Auburn was in a tough position. Whenever you fire a head coach, now you're put in a tough situation as far as the high school signing class goes. Every team wants to have a new head coach in place before signing day. Auburn had that. However, signing day got moved up a couple of weeks. It used to be right before Christmas. It got moved up to this first week in December. And because Alex Golesh was hired the past Sunday, and then signing day was Wednesday, it made it really difficult to really make a splash on signing day. Now, I understand there'll be some pushback that, well, Carson, I looked at LSU and I look at Florida and I look at a few other places, and they didn't, they had a head coach hired right before signing day too, and they had some better classes. And I'd say, yes, you're right. However, look at their class before the new head coach got there. And that's the difference. Auburn's recruiting class under Hugh Freeze this year was already not very strong. It was going to be a small class. So when Alex Golesh took over, he wasn't taking over a very strong or very big class as was. So he was put in a tough position. Auburn did lose out on two of their highest ranked commits. They ended up flipping on signing day, one to Mississippi State and one to Ole Miss. Those two hurt. Auburn added, though, got a big flip in a four-star defensive lineman from Texas. That was really big. And then Auburn also added a couple of guys from the South Florida class that I think Alex Golesh felt strongly about that can contribute at Auburn, and as well as added a couple other guys, flipped a receiver from Duke, and a couple other flips in there. So suffice to say, this was not a strong high school recruiting class for Auburn, but it never was going to be. So I wouldn't rush to judge Alex Golesh on his recruiting chops based on this high school recruiting class. The last I looked, it was at the 46th ranked class, which I believe is going to go down as the worst in Auburn history, which tells you a lot about Auburn and how well Auburn historically has been recruiting. But yeah, it was a tough high school recruiting class. Again, the focus for Auburn this cycle, this year, is one, going to be on roster retention, and two, is going to be in the transfer portal. Next year, high school recruiting class is where you'll really get to judge Alex Golesh and his staff as far as their recruiting prowess goes. One thing I will push back on, though, that I've seen some people say is that, well, high school recruiting doesn't matter at all. It's all irrelevant. I would disagree on that. High school recruiting absolutely still does matter. Because look at Auburn's roster right now. A lot of those guys were high school recruits that Auburn is trying to hold on to. So high school recruiting still does matter. Does it matter maybe as much as it used to? No. But it still plays a big role. If you want to be a championship caliber program, I believe the philosophy should be recruit at a high level at high school, focus on retaining those guys and developing those guys, and then 3, supplement through the portal. This year, Auburn's going to have to go heavier on the portal, I do believe, because you are going to have quite a bit of roster turnover. That's okay for year one. But for a long-term strategy, I still believe in high school recruiting and its importance. So, with that in mind, what are the next steps for Alex Golesh and this staff? It's on to the portal, it's on to roster retention. Alex Golesh and this staff have to determine what guys they want to keep first off. The meetings are ongoing. They've been meeting with the players as we've this past week, and I'm sure that will continue. They have to figure out who fits this culture, who's bought into this culture, and who fits their style as well. There's some guys offensively that I think Alex Golesh and the staff look at and say, well, maybe they were a fit for a Hugh Freeze offense, but maybe they're not a fit for us. There will be some of that. I would expect quite a bit of turnover on the offensive side of the ball. I really would, because I think there's a lot of guys that don't quite fit what Alex Golesh wants to do offensively, and I think he's going to have some other guys that he'd rather bring in through the portal. So yes, Auburn's going to focus on retaining a lot of guys. I'm just not sure they're going to look to retain a ton of guys on the offensive side of the ball. I think the retention will be more focused on a few guys offensively, like Cam Coleman, maybe like Deuce Knight and a few others, but then I think a lot of the retention will focus more on the defensive side of the ball. So that is what the process is right now. Alex Golesh and the staff are evaluating who they would like to keep and who they would encourage to move on, and then figure out after that who do we need to go after in the portal. I would, of course, expect a few guys to come over from South Florida that they feel can play at the SEC level. Could that be Byron Brown, who was the quarterback for South Florida the past season? Sure. Could it be some of those receivers there? Sure. Again, still a lot to be determined. As for the guys that have already announced their intentions to enter the transfer portal, just a side note here, transfer portal does not officially open until January 2nd. So you're going to see a lot of guys announcing their intention to enter the portal. And they can't officially do it until January, so that's just of note. So even if Auburn has a guy that says he's going to enter that Auburn wants to keep, say, for instance, a Cam Coleman, hope this doesn't happen, but say Cam Coleman announces his intentions to enter the transfer portal, Auburn will still have a month, if he did it like today, to try to get him to stay. Now, some of these guys, again, Auburn has just, encouraged them to look elsewhere. So, with that being said, a few guys that have entered have been some defenses reserve guys who really didn't play on the defensive side of the ball. If they did, played limited roles. And then the biggest ones, biggest names so far, Jackson Arnold and Perry Thompson. So first on Arnold, I just want to say, look, I hate it for him that it didn't work out. Look, we know all about his history as a high school prospect. Unfortunately, so far, it hasn't worked. It didn't work at Oklahoma. It did not work at Auburn. There's a lot of blame to go around. Some of it falls on Hugh Freeze. Some of it falls on Jackson Arnold. I think he's a good dude. I wish him the best and hope he finds a spot where he can really develop into the quarterback that he hopes and that many people expected him to be. As for Perry Thompson, this one, it's not unexpected. I hate it, though, because I love Perry Thompson, his story, and his life story first, but also his recruitment and what that meant for Auburn at the time. It really was the start of the Hugh Freeze era that, hey, Hugh Freeze showed that he can recruit with the big boys, and he got Perry Thompson to buy in. He flipped from Alabama. This was a really big deal for Auburn, and it started to, hopefully, we thought at the time, to flip the script on Auburn football moving forward. Ultimately, it didn't. Ultimately, things did not pan out for Auburn football under Hugh Freeze or for Perry Thompson, and I do hate that, but I do wish him the best, and I am thankful for his decision ultimately to come to Auburn a couple of years ago. And as I just mentioned, I would expect a lot of attrition on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the wide receiver room in particular. I think Auburn will work hard to keep Cam Coleman. I think they'll likely try to keep Malcolm Simmons and Eric Singleton, but besides that, I think we'll see a lot of attrition in the wide receiver room and in the offense overall. What's going to happen at the quarterback position, though? I think a lot of people have that question, myself included. I have some guesses. I have some opinions on it. I don't know anything for certain at the moment. My guess is that Auburn's going to bring in Byron Brown, the transfer quarterback from South Florida. If they do that, what does that mean for Deuce Knight? What does that mean for Ashton Daniels? I don't know the answer to that. Would that scare off Deuce Knight and lead him to transfer? Maybe. I don't know. That's my guess at the moment, is that Auburn will bring in Byron Brown. If you haven't watched him, really good quarterback from South Florida. He has another year of eligibility. That makes sense to me. But maybe Alex Golesh looks at this quarterback room and he says, you know what? I like Deuce Knight. I think he can be ready to be the guy this upcoming season, so I don't need to go into the portal and go grab someone like Byron Brown. I kind of doubt that's going to be the case, but that is a possibility. So that's, of course, a big storyline that we will keep our eyes on throughout this off season. Just a final thought as we close out here. To Auburn fans, just do not panic. There's going to be a lot of turnover. There's going to be guys that leave that, quite frankly, Auburn fans aren't going to be happy to leave. So I'm saying this to myself, as much as I'm saying it to you. Don't panic. Let the dust settle. Let's see who leaves. Let's see who Auburn brings in. And then let's judge things at that point. When we get to the end of January and this roster is set and we see who is left and we see who is in there, then we can judge things. Until then, don't panic. Let's see it play out. Let's see Alex Golesh get in his roster. I know there's a lot of guys on this Auburn roster that Auburn fans are like a lot, including myself. Some of those guys may not buy into Alex Golesh's culture, and that's okay. He has to figure out who is bought in and who wants to be at Auburn and who fits his culture and who fits his system at the end of the day. So let's see how it all shakes out, and then we can judge how we feel about things. But just my advice to myself and to others, do not panic. Let's see how all this plays out, and then let's come to an opinion in January. Okay, moving on now, let's talk about Auburn basketball. Really a mixed week for Auburn basketball, really big week for Auburn basketball. Two massive games this week. Had the ACC-SEC Challenge on Wednesday, and Auburn faced off against NC State in that one. And then Auburn played Arizona late on Saturday night out in Arizona. Let's start with the good, which was the NC State game. Auburn won that game against NC State, shot incredibly well. Keyshawn Hall and Kevin Overton were fantastic in that game. Both were extremely hot from three. Thankfully, because Auburn turned the ball over 20 times. So it was really an ugly game for Auburn. Auburn was either going to make a shot or they were going to turn it over. NC State wasn't stopping them. So it was a really odd game. I thought defensively Auburn played fairly well. And then Auburn, I think, won this game by 10 plus points in the end. Really, if Auburn didn't turn the ball over as much as they did, they would have won this game probably by 20 plus. But nonetheless, Auburn took care of business. That was big to get that win because we knew that the game against Arizona on Saturday night was going to be extremely difficult. It was going to be a tough challenge for Auburn. And it was. Auburn lost this game to Arizona by 29 points on Saturday night. It was ugly. Auburn competed early in the game. The first 10 minutes of this game, Auburn, I thought, played pretty well. But it was going to take more than 10 minutes. It was going to take a full 40 minutes of that effort and that execution to compete with what is an elite Arizona team, a team that's going to be a number one team in the country this week in the AP poll. And Auburn just wasn't able to compete for 40 minutes. There were too many lapses on the offensive end that led to poor defense for Auburn. Auburn has just these spurts in every single game. And again, it's just a part of a team that's growing and developing still where they just lose their minds offensively. And then that leads to bad defense and the teams go on big runs. And you can afford that in a game against a lesser opponent or a team that's not as good as you are. But against a team like Arizona that is better than you are, you cannot afford that. And Auburn had multiple spurts in this Arizona game where they just lost their minds offensively, got out of rhythm, and then it led to bad defense, and then all of a sudden Arizona's on a 15-0 run, and you're like, what just happened? That's happening in every game so far this season for Auburn. And yes, basketball is a game of streaks, that's said ad nauseum, but Auburn has to get better in that, has to develop more consistency. At this point in the season, we're 10 games in. Auburn is 7-3. I have a pretty good feel for this team at this point. This is a solid team that at its best can be pretty good, but also at its worst can be pretty bad. So I don't think this is a bad team. I know that losing by 29 and losing by 30 to Michigan, two of the best teams in college basketball, can make you feel pretty bad about yourself. Auburn is not in the same class as the elite teams in college basketball this season. And I don't think they're ever going to be. There are limitations to this roster. We know that Auburn's limited in the front court. Auburn's limited as far as their depth goes. Really is not a very deep team at all. We know that at this point. I don't expect that to change. However, Auburn can be a pretty good team at its best. And I think can compete with the elite if they can play at their best. But right now, Auburn is not anywhere near the elite top of college basketball, and that's okay. A lot of teams aren't. That doesn't mean you're a bad team. It just means you're not an elite team. So for Auburn, they have to continue to develop, continue to grow, continue to get better on the defensive end, and figure things out offensively to where you don't enter these funks where you get no ball movement, where things aren't really moving. Because when this offense is in rhythm and when it's rolling, when the ball's getting moved around, when this team's sharing the basketball and they're not playing selfishly, this offense is pretty good. But when things start to turn into hero ball on the offensive end and Auburn starts to force things and the ball movement gets really stagnant, this team starts to struggle. The lack of the front court as well is going to be an issue for Auburn all season. Look, you're putting a lot on Keyshawn Murphy because he's really the only true big that you have right now down there. Philip Jovic and Sway are doing the best they can, but they're both undersized at 6'8". That's played with extreme intensity and physicality. They're doing their best, but Auburn is going to be outmatched against teams like Arizona and Michigan. The good news is, as Stephen Pearl said after the game last night against Arizona, that Auburn's not going to see anyone in the SEC any better than Arizona or Michigan. Those two teams are the top of college basketball, along with a couple other teams of college basketball so far this season. And I don't think anyone in the SEC is better than those two teams. I don't think anyone's even as good as those two teams right now. Now, there are a couple teams like Florida, like even maybe Alabama, that could get up to that level this season. That's still to be determined. So that's the good news for Auburn. Auburn is good enough to compete with every team in the SEC and to beat just about every team in the SEC this season. They're just not at the top of college basketball, and I don't think anyone ever expected that to be the case this year for this Auburn roster. I was hopeful that Auburn could compete better, though, with a team like Arizona and with a team like Michigan At this point, they're not able to. Can they get there by the end of the season? We'll see. They're going to have to continue to work to develop again. I'll mention it. I've said it once. I've said it 100 times. This is still a new team. They're still learning how to play together. Again, still only 10 games into the year. Can you develop that consistency, more consistency as the season progresses? That's going to be a big deal and will ultimately determine the ceiling of this team. As for what I would like to see more of moving forward, I need more guys to step up. Kevin Overton did it in the NC State game, besides Keyshawn Hall and Tahad Pettiford. I need more. There has to be, I need more from Elijah Freeman on the offensive end. I need more from Keyshawn Murphy on the offensive end. Those guys have to provide more. There were looks there last night for Elijah Freeman and Kevin Overton against Arizona that they just didn't make. I like those looks. Auburn has to knock those down. So need more. Freeman and Overton can provide more. They need to do it. Overton, one, needs to do it more consistently. Freeman just needs to do it more, period. If Auburn can get those couple of guys, along with Keyshawn Murphy, going on the offensive end, you can throw in Sebastian Williams-Adams. That can take some pressure off of Tahad Pettiford and Keyshawn Hall, and I think will make this team better if you can get more on the offensive end out of them. Because right now, so much pressure is on Keyshawn Hall and Tahad Pettiford offensively. And like last night, Keyshawn Hall did not have a good game offensively. Tahad Pettiford did, but again, if Hall and Pettiford are both off, this Auburn team's in trouble, and you can't expect them to be hot every single night. So Auburn needs more from this team, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. But don't freak out if you're an Auburn fan. This is not a bad team, but they're also not an elite team. And when I look at this team right now, to me, I think they could fall anywhere between a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament to an 11 seed that's on the bubble. I think that is the range I'm looking at. Your hope, I think, if you're an Auburn fan, is this team really does hit its stride, which I think is possible come March, and they do get hot, and they really do figure things out. And there's still going to be tough matchups, and if Auburn faces a team with really good bigs and a lot of size and a lot of length, it's not going to be a favorable matchup for Auburn. But I think your hope is this team really starts to click at that point, and maybe they can get up to a 5 seed even and make a run in March Madness. But right now, I think this team right now is anywhere between like a 6 seed and 11 seed as far as what they can do. And I hope that they get closer to that 6 seed mark this season. And I really do believe they can compete and still be in the top, at least half, if not top quarter of the SEC this season. But still a lot of development. Still, this team needs to get a lot better. The good news is they have a week off before facing Chattanooga on Saturday in the holiday Hoopsgiving in Atlanta. So Auburn faces Chattanooga, then we'll play Purdue. And that's the last big non-conference game Auburn has. But Chattanooga first up on Saturday. This team needs a breather. This was a tough schedule. They went to Las Vegas, played 3 straight games, came back home, and then turned around and played NC State, a late game on a Wednesday night, then had to fly out to Arizona and play a game on Saturday night. They probably do need a little rest, so this week will be good, I think, for them, and then hopefully you'll see an inspired effort against Chattanooga on Saturday. But that will wrap us up for this edition of Talkin Tumors. Not too long of an episode today. Didn't have a ton to get into, but again, things are constantly evolving on the football front as far as things go with Alex Golesh and his staff and the roster retention. Again, as I mentioned, by the time you're listening to this show, there's a good chance more news has broken and more changes have been made. But again, as I'm recording this on Sunday, that was the latest information I have. So hopefully it'll be a good week for Auburn. Hopefully more staff hires will be made, and we'll see about the roster and what turnover happens there. And then Auburn basketball hopefully get back on track next Saturday against Chattanooga. But thank you all so much for listening or watching. We'll be back with another edition of Talkin Tumors next week. Thank you for listening to Talkin Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow @Talkin Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.